The prairie stretched out before Winona Anderson like a golden sea, waves of tall grass bending under the hot summer wind. She never imagined her 20th birthday would find her fighting for her life, but fate had other plans on this scorching July afternoon in 1875. Winona wiped sweat from her brow, her eyes stinging from the acrid smoke that grew thicker by the minute. What had begun as a simple trip to deliver medicine to her ailing aunt in Montana City had become a desperate struggle for survival when she noticed the first tendrils of smoke on the horizon. The wind had shifted suddenly, as summer winds often did in Montana territory. Within minutes, the distant smudge became a roaring wall of flame, racing across the drought-stricken grassland with terrifying speed. Now, flames surrounded her on all sides, her horse long since bolted in terror, leaving her stranded in a rapidly shrinking circle of unburned grass. The heat pressed against her skin like a physical force, making it harder to breathe with each passing moment. "This cannot be how it ends," Winona whispered to herself, clutching her mother's silver locket around her neck. The small parcel of medicine she'd been carrying lay abandoned somewhere in the grass behind her. The smoke was disorienting, making it impossible to know which way might lead to safety. Winona pulled her shawl over her mouth, trying to filter the worst of it, but her eyes watered so badly she could barely see 3 feet ahead. The roar of the flames grew louder, drowning out all other sounds. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm her completely, Winona heard something unexpected cutting through the wall of noise hoofbeats, fast and purposeful. Then a silhouette appeared, a tall figure on horseback, emerging from the curtain of smoke like a specter. The rider wore a bandana pulled up over his nose and mouth, and his hat was pulled low against the heat. "Follow my voice," the man shouted, his deep voice carrying above the crackling flames. "This way, hurry." Winona hesitated only a fraction of a second before rushing toward the mounted stranger. He extended a gloved hand, which she grasped desperately. With one powerful motion, he pulled her up behind him onto the saddle of his magnificent chestnut stallion. "Hold tight," he commanded, and Winona wrapped her arms around his waist as the horse reared and plunged forward into the smoke. The next few minutes were a terrifying blur. The heat was unbearable, flames licking at them from all sides as the horse navigated through the inferno with uncanny precision. Winona buried her face against the stranger's back, feeling the strong muscles shift beneath his shirt as he guided the animal. Finally, the air began to clear. The roaring flames receded behind them, and the horse's pace slowed from a frantic gallop to a steady trot. When Winona dared to look up, she saw they had reached a rocky outcropping where the fire couldn't follow. Her rescuer brought the horse to a stop and turned his head slightly. "You all right back there, miss?" Winona realized she was still clinging to him with all her strength. She loosened her grip and nodded weakly. "Yes, thanks to you. I thought I was going to die out there." He dismounted in one fluid motion and reached up to help her down. As her feet touched solid ground, her legs buckled beneath her. The cowboy caught her before she fell, strong hands steadying her trembling form. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentler than before. As he pulled down his bandana, Winona got her first clear look at the man who had saved her life. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with a face weathered by sun and wind but handsome nonetheless. His eyes were a striking blue against his tanned skin, and a day's worth of stubble darkened his jaw. "Name's Reese Layton," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "What in God's name were you doing out there alone with a prairie fire coming?" "Winona Anderson," she replied, feeling suddenly defensive. "I was delivering medicine to my aunt in Montana City when my horse spooked at the first smell of smoke. He threw me and ran off." She coughed, her throat raw from the smoke. I didn't realize how fast the fire would spread. Reese nodded, his expression softening slightly. Nobody ever does. Prairie fires are beasts. They can outrun a horse if the wind's behind them. He handed her a canteen. Drink. Slow sips. The water was lukewarm but felt like heaven on her parched throat. Winona took several small swallows before handing it back. Thank you, Mr. Layton. Not just for the water, for everything. Call me Reese, he said, looking back toward the distant wall of fire. We're not out of trouble yet. That fire's headed straight for Cottonwood Creek. If it jumps the water, half the county could burn. Winona followed his gaze to the ominous orange glow on the horizon. How did it start? Lightning strike, most likely. Been too dry this summer. He squinted at the sun, which hung low in the western sky. We need to get moving. There's a ranch about 3 miles east where you'll be safe. But my aunt needs this medicine, Winona protested, then remembered she'd lost the package. Oh no, the parcel. I dropped it somewhere back there. Reese's expression remained neutral. What kind of medicine? Heart medicine. She's been poorly for months now. He nodded, his jaw setting in a determined line. Montana City's to the north. We can't go directly, fires blocking the way, but we can circle around if we move quick. Winona asked, surprised. I'm not leaving you stranded twice in one day, Miss Anderson, he replied with a hint of a smile. Besides, I was headed that way myself. Before she could respond, he was checking his horse's tack, tightening the cinch with practiced movements. This is Thunder, he said, patting the chestnut's neck. Best horse I've ever owned. He's strong enough to carry us both a fair distance. Winona approached cautiously and stroked the horse's velvety nose. Thank you, Thunder, she murmured, for saving my life. Reese watched her for a moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he cleared his throat. Best get going. Can you ride? Since I was 6, she answered with more confidence than she felt. Her head was still spinning from the smoke and the near-death experience. He nodded and helped her mount before swinging up behind her. This time, he was the one who wrapped his arms around her waist to reach the reins. We'll follow the ridge for a while, he said, his breath warm against her ear. Keep the fire to our left, head east, then turn north when we find a safe passage. As Thunder carried them away from immediate danger, Winona tried to process everything that had happened. An hour ago, she'd been certain she was going to die, engulfed in flames with no hope of escape. Now she was alive, heading toward Montana City with this mysterious cowboy who'd appeared from nowhere to save her. What brought you out this way? She asked over her shoulder. There was a pause before he answered. Saw the smoke. Been working at the Circle M Ranch these past months. When the fire started, a bunch of us rode out to help where we could. And the others scattered. Some went to warn homesteads in the fire's path. Others are trying to dig fire breaks or backburn to control the spread. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Thunder's hooves and the distant roar of the fire. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape and giving the smoke-filled sky an eerie crimson glow. We'll have to find shelter soon, Reese said eventually. Can't risk riding through unfamiliar terrain in the dark, especially with a fire on our tail. What kind of shelter can we find out here? Winona asked, looking at the sparse landscape around them. There's an old line shack that belongs to the Circle M not far from here. Basic, but it'll keep us safe for the night. True to his word, about an hour later they came upon a small, weathered cabin nestled against a rocky hillside. It was little more than a one-room structure with a lean-to for horses, but to Winona, it looked like a palace. Reese dismounted and helped her down, then led Thunder to the lean-to. Wait inside, he told her, handing her a small key. I'll see to Thunder and bring in some firewood. The interior of the lined shack was Spartan but clean. A small iron stove occupied one corner, a narrow cot another. A rough-hewn table with two mismatched chairs stood in the center. Winona lit the oil lamp hanging from a ceiling beam and set about exploring their temporary refuge. She found a bucket and went to the small spring behind the cabin to fetch water. By the time Reese entered with an armload of firewood, she had water heating on the stove. He raised an eyebrow. "Making yourself at home?" "I figured we could both use some coffee if you have any," she replied. "And maybe clean up a bit. I'm covered in soot." Reese set the wood down and reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a small pouch. "Coffee I've got. Food's limited to jerky and hardtack, I'm afraid." "Better than nothing," Winona said with a small smile. As night fell, they sat across from each other at the small table, drinking coffee and sharing the simple meal. Winona found herself studying Reese when he wasn't looking. There was something both hard and gentle about him, the calloused hands that handled the delicate coffee cup, the sharp eyes that softened when they met hers. "How long have you been a cowboy?" she asked. "Since I was 16, he replied. "Left home in Missouri after my parents died. Headed west, found work where I could." "I'm sorry about your parents," he shrugged. "It was a long time ago." He took a sip of coffee. "What about you? You from Montana City?" Winona shook her head. "No, I live in Copper Hill with my father. He's a doctor there. My mother died when I was 12. "So you were taking medicine from your father to your aunt?" "Yes, I make the journey every month." "Usually without nearly dying," she added with a wry smile. That earned her a chuckle, the first she'd heard from him. The sound was warm and genuine, transforming his face. "Well, Miss Anderson, I think we should both get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Please call me Winona," he nodded. "Winona, then." An awkward silence followed as both became acutely aware of the single cot in the room. "You take the bed," Reese said firmly. "I'll sleep by the stove. I've bedded down in worse places." Despite her protests, he insisted, arranging his saddle blanket on the floor. Winona finally relented and stretched out on the narrow cot, still wearing her soot-stained dress. She was more exhausted than she realized, and despite the strange surroundings and her lingering anxiety about the fire, she fell asleep almost immediately. She awoke hours later to the sound of Reese stoking the fire in the stove. Gray dawn light filtered through the single small window. "Morning," he said when he noticed she was awake. "Fires moved south overnight. The path to Montana City should be clear now." Winona sat up, smoothing her hopelessly rumpled dress. "That's good news." "There's fresh water in the bucket if you want to wash up," he offered. "I'll go check on Thunder." When he returned, Winona had managed to clean most of the soot from her face and hands and had arranged her hair as best she could without a proper brush. "How far is it to Montana City from here?" she asked as they shared the last of the coffee. "About 4 hours' ride if we push it," Reese replied. "We should reach there by midday." They set out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon. The air was clearer today, though the smell of smoke still lingered. Riding double was slower going, but Thunder proved as strong and sure-footed as Reese had claimed. As they rode, Winona told Reese about growing up as a doctor's daughter, helping her father with his patients after her mother died, learning about medicines and treatments. In turn, he shared stories of his life on the range cattle drives in Texas, winters in Wyoming, the characters he'd met along the way. By the time Montana City came into view, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley with mountains rising behind it, Winona realized she was reluctant for the journey to end. There was something about Reese Layton that intrigued her, a depth beneath his reserved exterior. They rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from townsfolk. Winona directed him to a modest house on the eastern edge of town. "This is my aunt's place," she said as Reese helped her dismount. Before they could reach the door, it flew open, and an older woman rushed out. "Winona." "Thank heavens. When we heard about the fire, I was beside myself with worry." The woman embraced Winona tightly, then pulled back to examine her. "Are you hurt? How did you get through?" "I'm fine, Aunt Martha. This is Reese Layton. He saved my life when the fire had me surrounded." Martha turned to Reese, clasping his hand in both of hers. "God bless you, young man. Please come in, both of you." Inside, over tea and freshly baked bread, Winona explained what had happened. Her aunt's eyes widened at the tale. "The medicine," Winona said suddenly. "I lost it when my horse bolted. I'm so sorry, Aunt Martha." "Don't you worry about that," Martha said firmly. "Your father can send more. The important thing is you're safe." "I can ride back to Copper Hill tomorrow," Winona offered. "Explain what happened and bring back another parcel." "Nonsense," her aunt replied. "The stage will be through in 3 days. We'll send a letter." Martha turned to Reese. "Mr. Layton, I insist you stay for dinner at least. It's the least I can do to thank you for saving my niece." Reese shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's very kind, madam, but I should check in with my outfit. They'll be wondering what happened to me." "The Circle M, right?" Martha asked. "Jacob Miller's place. I know his wife, Sarah. I'll send word you're safe." With his excuse removed, Reese reluctantly agreed to stay for dinner. Martha shooed them both out of the kitchen, insisting they rest while she prepared the meal. Winona showed Reese to the small parlor. "My aunt won't take no for an answer, I'm afraid. She's famous for her cooking, though, so you won't regret staying." "I don't doubt it," he replied, looking around the tidy room with its crocheted doilies and family photographs. It was clear he felt out of place in such a domestic setting. "Tell me more about the Circle M," Winona said, trying to put him at ease. "How long have you worked there?" "About 6 months," he answered, relaxing slightly. "Mr. Miller's a fair boss, pays well, treats his men right. And before that," Reese hesitated. "Moved around a lot, never stayed in one place too long." Something in his tone made Winona suspect there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she told him about Montana City, pointing out people in the photographs on the mantel, sharing bits of local history. By the time Martha called them to dinner, Reese seemed more at ease. The meal was everything Winona had promised: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed more freely, with Martha drawing Reese out about his background and experiences. "Where will you go after the Circle M?" Martha asked as they finished their pie. Reese shrugged. "Haven't decided yet. Maybe California. Heard there's good work there." "Well," Martha said, refilling his coffee cup, "Montana has a lot to offer a hard-working young man like yourself. Good land, good people." She shot a meaningful glance at Winona, who felt her cheeks warm. After dinner, Reese insisted on helping with the dishes despite Martha's protests. Winona dried as he washed, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed plates back and forth. Each brief contact sent a flutter through her stomach that she tried to ignore. "Your aunt seems to be doing well," Reese observed quietly. "For someone needing heart medicine." Winona nodded. "The medicine helps keep her condition manageable. She has good days and bad days. She seems fond of you. We grew closer after my mother died. She helped fill that gap in a way." As the evening wore on, Martha announced she was retiring for the night. "Winona, you'll show Mr. Layton to the guest room, and perhaps take him to see the garden. It's lovely in the moonlight." Winona recognized her aunt's transparent matchmaking but couldn't bring herself to object. She led Reese through the back door into Martha's pride, enjoy a garden filled with flowers and herbs that scented the night air. They walked in silence for a moment, following a narrow path between carefully tended beds. "Your aunt is quite the gardener," Reese commented. "It's her passion. She knows every plant by name and its medicinal properties." They reached a small bench beneath an apple tree and sat down. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light over everything. "I never properly thanked you," Winona said softly. "For what you did yesterday. No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone would have ridden into a prairie fire to save a stranger." Reese was silent for a long moment. "When I saw you out there surrounded by flames." He trailed off, then started again. "I lost my sister in a fire. Years ago back in Missouri. She was 16. "I'm so sorry," Winona whispered. "That's why I left home. Too many memories." His voice was rough with emotion. "When I saw you yesterday, I couldn't let it happen again, not if there was something I could do." Without thinking, Winona reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "And thank you for being there." They sat in companionable silence, hands still joined, until the night air grew cool enough to drive them inside. The next morning, Reese announced he needed to return to the Circle M. "They'll be short-handed with the fire cleanup," he explained over breakfast. "Of course," Winona said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Will you be staying on at the ranch, for a while at least?" he replied. "Got no reason to move on just yet." Martha insisted on packing him food for the journey and pressed a jar of her famous blackberry preserves into his hands. "You must come back and visit us," she told him. "Winona stays with me for a week every month when she brings my medicine. Perhaps next time you could escort her. The trails aren't always safe for a young woman traveling alone." Reese glanced at Winona, a question in his eyes. "If Miss Anderson wouldn't mind the company." "I'd welcome it," Winona said, perhaps too quickly. With promises to return, Reese mounted Thunder and rode out of Montana City. Winona watched until he disappeared from sight, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. "He's a fine young man," Martha observed, standing beside her niece. "And he looks at you the way your uncle used to look at me." "Aunt Martha," Winona protested, blushing. "I'm just saying what I see," her aunt replied with a smile. "Now come help me in the garden. It'll keep your mind occupied." The days passed slowly. Winona wrote to her father explaining what had happened, and received a reply that he would send more medicine with a trusted friend, who was traveling to Montana City the following week. She spent her days helping her aunt, reading, and thinking far too often about a certain blue-eyed cowboy. True to his word, Reese returned exactly 4 weeks later, the day before Winona was due to begin her journey home. He appeared at Martha's door with his hat in his hands, looking freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. Martha welcomed him like a long-lost relative, ushering him in and immediately offering food and drink. "I came to see if Winona would like an escort back to Copper Hill," he said, his eyes finding hers across the room. "That would be wonderful," Winona replied, trying to contain her excitement. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning." "Perfect timing," Martha declared. "You'll stay for dinner, of course, Mr. Layton, and Winona made an apple cake this afternoon that I'm sure you'll enjoy." The evening passed pleasantly, with Reese sharing news of how the community had recovered from the fire. No lives had been lost, though several homesteads had been damaged and countless acres of grazing land destroyed. "Mr. Miller gave me a few days off," Reese mentioned over dinner. "Said I'd earned it after helping with the fire breaks." "How fortunate," Martha commented with a knowing smile. "That will give you time to see Winona safely home and perhaps stay in Copper Hill for a day or two." The journey to Copper Hill took 2 days on horseback. Winona rode her aunt's mare, a gentle gray named Daisy, while Reese led the way on Thunder. They followed the stage-coach road, stopping to camp overnight beside a small creek. As they sat by the campfire, drinking coffee and watching the stars appear one by one, Winona found herself studying Reese's profile in the flickering light. In the month since their first meeting, he had occupied her thoughts more than she cared to admit. "Something on your mind?" he asked, catching her gaze. Winona looked away, embarrassed. "I was just thinking how strange it is that we met the way we did, if not for the fire." "I believe some things are meant to be," Reese said quietly. "My mother used to say that God's hand is in everything, even the hard times." "Do you believe that?" He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks flying upward. "I'm not sure what I believe anymore, but meeting you." He hesitated. "It feels like something important." Winona's heart quickened. "It does to me too." Their eyes met across the fire, and for a moment the rest of the world seemed to fade away. Then Reese cleared his throat and stood up. "We should get some rest. Early start tomorrow." Winona nodded, feeling both disappointed and exhilarated. Something had passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was quite ready to name. They reached Copper Hill the following afternoon. The town was larger than Montana City, with several streets of businesses and homes spreading out from the central square. Winona's father's house stood on a hill overlooking the town, a handsome two-story structure with a wide porch. Dr. William Anderson was delighted to see his daughter safely returned and effusively thankful to Reese for his part in saving her life. He insisted Reese stay with them rather than at the hotel. "Any man who would ride through fire to save my daughter has a place at my table for as long as he wishes," the doctor declared. Over the next few days, Reese became a part of their household routine. He helped Dr. Anderson repair a sagging porch rail and split firewood for the coming winter. In the evenings, he sat with them in the parlor, sometimes reading while Winona played the piano, other times joining in conversation about everything from politics to literature. To Winona's surprise, Reese was well-read despite his limited formal education. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married," he explained. "She made sure I knew Shakespeare and Dickens as well as how to rope a steer." On his third day in Copper Hill, Reese announced he needed to return to the Circle M. "Mr. Miller's counting on me for the fall roundup," he explained over breakfast. Dr. Anderson nodded in understanding. "Of course, young man. Duty calls." Winona tried to hide her disappointment. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning," Reese replied, not quite meeting her eyes. "Perhaps you could show Mr. Layton the view from Prospect Point this afternoon, Winona," her father suggested. "It's our town's best feature, and the weather is perfect for a ride." Winona recognized her father's matchmaking as easily as she had her aunt's, but was grateful for it nonetheless. "That's a wonderful idea. If you're interested, Reese." "I'd like that very much," he replied, a smile lighting his features. They set out after lunch, riding side by side along a winding trail that led up into the foothills east of town. The September day was warm but not hot, with a light breeze carrying the scent of pine and late-blooming wildflowers. "Your father is a good man," Reese said as they rode. "I see where you get your kindness." "He's devoted his life to helping others," Winona replied. "Even after my mother died when he was heartbroken, he never stopped caring for his patients. That takes a special kind of strength." "Yes," she agreed. "Though sometimes I worry about him being alone so much. I'm gone for a week every month and he has no one but Mrs. Peters, our housekeeper, for company." "He seems content," Reese observed. "Content, perhaps, but not happy. Not the way he was when my mother was alive." They reached Prospect Point, a rocky outcropping that provided a panoramic view of the valley below. Copper Hill was visible in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, the church steeple gleaming in the afternoon sun. They dismounted and secured the horses, then walked to the edge of the lookout. A fallen log provided a natural bench where they sat, taking in the vista before them. "It's beautiful," Reese said softly. "It is," Winona agreed. "I've always loved it up here. It puts everything in perspective somehow." A comfortable silence fell between them. Winona was acutely aware of Reese beside her, his arm almost but not quite touching hers. Finally, she gathered her courage. "Will you come back?" she asked. After the roundup, Reese turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "Do you want me to?" "Yes," she said simply. He reached out slowly and took her hand in his. "Then I will." They sat that way for a long time, hands joined, watching the shadows lengthen across the valley as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. When they finally rode back to town, something had changed between them. No declarations had been made, no promises beyond his agreement to return, yet Winona felt as though they had crossed an invisible threshold. That evening, after dinner, Winona's father was called away to attend a patient, leaving her and Reese alone in the parlor. The lamp cast a warm glow over the room and a small fire crackled in the hearth to ward off the evening chill. "I've been thinking," Reese said after a while, "about staying in one place, putting down roots." Winona set aside her embroidery. "What kind of roots?" "The Circle M is a good outfit. Mr. Miller mentioned he might be looking to take on a partner eventually, someone to help manage the ranch as he gets older." "Is that something you'd want?" Reese nodded slowly. "I think it might be. Never thought much about the future before. Always just focused on the next job, the next town." He met her eyes. Things looked different now. Winona's heart quickened. "Because of the fire," a smile touched his lips. "Because of what I found in the fire." Before she could respond, the front door opened and her father returned, stamping his feet on the porch to remove the dust. The moment passed, but the words lingered in Winona's mind as she prepared for bed that night. "Because of what I found in the fire." She fell asleep thinking of blue eyes and strong hands and a voice calling through the smoke. Reese departed early the next morning. Winona stood on the porch watching as he mounted Thunder, his saddlebags packed with provisions her father had insisted he take. "The roundup should be finished by mid-October," he told her. "I'll come back then if that's all right." "I'll be here," she replied. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that had become familiar, then turned Thunder toward the road that would take him back to the Circle M. The weeks that followed passed slowly for Winona. She helped her father with his patients, resumed her regular visits to her aunt in Montana City, and tried not to count the days until mid-October. Martha, of course, wanted to know everything about Reese's visit to Copper Hill. "Did he speak of his intentions?" she asked eagerly. "Not in so many words," Winona admitted, "but he talked about staying at the Circle M long-term, maybe becoming a partner in the ranch someday." "A very sensible plan," Martha approved. "A man needs stability before he can think of marriage." Aunt Martha, who said anything about marriage. "No one needed to, dear," her aunt replied with a knowing smile. "It's written all over your face whenever you mention his name." Winona couldn't deny it. In the 2 months since Reese had ridden through smoke and flame to save her life, he had captured her heart completely. Whether he felt the same remained to be seen. October arrived, bringing cooler weather and the vibrant colors of autumn to the Montana landscape. Winona found herself watching the road from Copper Hill, hoping each day might bring the sight of a chestnut horse and its rider. Mid-month came and went with no sign of Reese. Winona tried not to worry, telling herself the roundup must have taken longer than expected, or perhaps he had other responsibilities at the ranch that prevented him from leaving. Late one afternoon in the final week of October, she was helping her father organize his medical supplies when they heard hoofbeats approaching. Winona's heart leapt, but she forced herself to continue her task, not wanting to appear too eager. Her father glanced out the window. "Looks like we have a visitor," he said with a smile. "A young man on a fine chestnut horse." Winona set down the bottles she was holding and smoothed her apron. "Is it Reese?" "Indeed it is. And he appears to be carrying something rather large." Curious, Winona joined her father at the window. Reese was dismounting in front of their house, and tied behind his saddle was what looked like a small tree, a sapling with its roots carefully wrapped in burlap. She hurried to the door and stepped onto the porch as Reese approached, the sapling in his arms. "You're late," she said, unable to keep a smile from her face despite her attempt at scolding. "Roundup ran long," he replied, "and I had to wait for this." He nodded at the tree. "It's an apple tree, same kind as the one in your aunt's garden where we sat that night." Winona stared at him, speechless. "I thought," Reese continued, suddenly looking uncertain, "that maybe we could plant it together, something that would grow over time." Understanding dawned on Winona. This wasn't just a tree, it was a symbol, a promise. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Doctor." Anderson appeared in the doorway behind her. "Mr. Layton, welcome back. I see you've brought a gift for our garden." "Yes, sir," Reese replied, straightening. "If you don't mind." "Mind, I think it's an excellent idea. The south corner of the garden gets good sunlight. It would thrive there." The doctor looked between them, a twinkle in his eye. "I suspect you two have matters to discuss. I'll just go inform Mrs. Peters we'll have a guest for dinner." He disappeared inside, leaving them alone on the porch. "You really meant to come back," Winona said, feeling foolish as soon as the words left her mouth. "I said I would." Reese set the sapling down carefully against the porch railing. "I've never been one to break a promise." "And the tree?" He took a step closer. "I told you I was thinking about putting down roots. I meant it." His voice grew softer. "But I need to know if there's reason enough for me to stay in these parts." Winona's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he must hear it. "What kind of reason would be enough?" "You," he said simply. "If you felt the same way I do." "And how is that?" Reese took her hands in his. "Like I found something in that fire I didn't even know I was looking for, something I don't want to lose." Winona squeezed his hands. "I feel the same way." The kiss that followed was gentle and brief, but it sealed something between them, a promise as significant as the young apple tree waiting to be planted. They had dinner with Dr. Anderson, who seemed unsurprised but pleased by the development in their relationship. Afterward, as the three of them sat in the parlor, Reese formally asked the doctor's permission to court his daughter. "You have my blessing," Dr. Anderson said warmly. "Though I believe my daughter made her choice the moment you rode through fire to find her." The following day, they planted the apple tree together in the garden. Reese dug the hole while Winona prepared the soil, mixing in compost the way her aunt had taught her. Together they placed the sapling in its new home, patting the earth around its roots and watering it thoroughly. "My mother would say this is an auspicious beginning," Reese told her as they stood admiring their handiwork. "Planting a tree together, nurturing something that will grow for decades to come." "What do you say?" Winona asked, slipping her hand into his. "I say she was right." He smiled down at her. "About that, and about fate having a hand in things." Reese stayed in Copper Hill for a week before reluctantly returning to the Circle M. "Mr. Miller needs help preparing the ranch for winter," he explained, "but I'll be back for Christmas if you'll have me." "We'll be waiting," Winona assured him. "Both me and the apple tree." Over the next year, their courtship flourished like the sapling in the garden. Reese visited whenever he could get away from the ranch, staying with Dr. Anderson, who had come to regard him as the son he never had. Winona continued her monthly trips to Montana City, sometimes with Reese as her escort when his duties allowed. During one of these journeys, as they camped beside the same creek where they had spent the night during their first trip to Copper Hill, Reese proposed. "I don't have much to offer yet," he said, holding a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "But Mr. Miller has agreed to sell me a parcel of land adjacent to the main ranch, 15 acres with a good spring and some timber. We could build a home there." "Yes," Winona said without hesitation, extending her hand for him to slip on the ring. "Though I should warn you, my father may try to convince us to settle in Copper Hill instead." Reese laughed. "I suspected as much. He's been dropping hints about a piece of land just outside town that's for sale." "And what did you tell him?" "That I'd discuss it with my future wife, as it should be her decision too." Winona smiled, touched by his consideration. "We'll figure it out together." They were married the following spring in the garden of Dr. Anderson's home, beneath the apple tree that had grown surprisingly quickly in its first year. It was in full bloom on their wedding day, its delicate white flowers scenting the air as they exchanged vows. Martha came from Montana City for the wedding, bringing with her seeds from her garden as a gift for the newlyweds. "For your own garden," she told them, "wherever you decide to make your home." In the end, they chose to build on the land near the Circle M. Reese continued working for Mr. Miller while developing their own small ranch, starting with a few head of cattle and gradually expanding. Winona established a large garden, growing both vegetables for their table and herbs for medicinal use. She also put her knowledge from years of assisting her father to good use, becoming known in the area as someone who could help with minor ailments when the doctor from town couldn't be fetched. Women particularly sought her out for assistance with childbirth and childcare, grateful for her gentle manner and practical advice. Dr. Anderson visited often, especially after he semi-retired and turned much of his practice over to a younger doctor. He would stay for weeks at a time, delighting in helping Reese with ranch work and spending evenings by the fire, reading to his grandchildren. For there were grandchildren, first a son, William Reese, born a year after their marriage, and then 2 years later, a daughter they named Elizabeth Martha. A third child, Robert, completed their family 3 years after that. The ranch prospered under Reese's careful management. When Mr. Miller decided to retire fully, he offered Reese the opportunity to buy the main ranch property. It was a stretch financially, but with Dr. Anderson's help and their own savings, they managed to acquire it, establishing the Layton Ranch as one of the most respected in the territory. 10 years after their wedding, Reese and Winona stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play under the apple tree they had transplanted from Copper Hill to their own garden. "Did you ever imagine this?" Winona asked, leaning against his shoulder. "That day when you rode through the fire to find me," Reese shook his head. "Not in my wildest dreams. I just knew I couldn't leave you there. It's strange to think how different our lives might have been if that fire hadn't happened." "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Reese said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Some things are just meant to be." Winona smiled up at him, like a prairie fire and a cowboy who wasn't afraid to ride through it. "Exactly like that," he agreed, bending to kiss her as their children's laughter rang out in the golden afternoon light. And in the years that followed, whenever they told their story to their children and later their grandchildren, it always began the same way, with a young woman surrounded by fire on all sides and a brave cowboy who rode through smoke, calling, "Follow my voice." It became family legend, a tale of courage and fate and the beginnings of a love that would span decades, a love born in fire, but nurtured like the apple tree that still bloomed each spring in their garden, its branches spreading wide to shelter generations of the family that grew beneath it. As they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends from throughout the territory, Reese and Winona stood once more beneath that apple tree. Its trunk was thick now, its branches heavy with fruit, roots deep in the Montana soil. "You know," Reese said quietly, his hair now silver but his blue eyes as bright as ever, "my mother was right about one more thing." "What's that?" Winona asked, her hand still fitting perfectly in his after all these years. "She always said the best way to measure a life well lived is by the love you've given and received." He squeezed her hand gently. "By that measure, I'd say we've done pretty well." Winona looked around at their family, at the home and life they'd built together from that fateful moment when fire brought them together. "More than well," she agreed. "I'd say we've been blessed beyond measure." And as the sun set on their anniversary celebration, casting long shadows across the land they'd nurtured and loved, Winona was certain of one thing. Sometimes the most devastating fires can lead to the most beautiful new beginnings, if you're brave enough to follow the right voice through the smoke.